Nola Vick had come to Dunmore Hall with a borrowed cloak and a list of instructions she had barely finished reading when she said the thing that would either free her or finish her, and she said it before the candle on the nightstand had burned down a quarter-inch. She had not meant to say it aloud. That was the part she could never explain cleanly afterward, not to Mrs. Brant, not to the magistrate, and not to the man lying in the great bed, who had heard her say it with his eyes half shut and his hands lying still on the coverlet, like a man already practicing at being somewhere else. She had meant to hold the observation in her chest the way her father had taught her to hold every observation before committing it to speech. Note it, name it, find the cause, then speak. And she had noted it and named it. But she had not yet completed the third step when her mouth moved without her permission. "He isn't wasting," she said. "He's being poisoned." The room went quiet the way rooms do when the unsayable thing has been said. Dr. Prescott Null stood at the window with his hands folded behind his back, a man composed for mourning. The housekeeper, Mrs. Brant, pressed the household keys against her skirt to keep them from jingling. A footman named Coates stood in the corner with a candle nobody had asked him to carry, and his mouth open, and nothing coming out of it. They had all arranged themselves around the dying of Gavin Hartfield, Earl of Dunmore, the way people arrange around a fire, close enough to feel the warmth, far enough to claim they weren't there for it. And Nola Vick, who had been fetched that morning from the village in a hired cart, whose father's apothecary shop had gone to creditors 7 weeks ago, whose name in the county was currently attached to the phrase that unfortunate business with Vick's receipts, understood very clearly that she was the least person in that room and had just made herself the loudest. She had not planned it. She had bent to take the Earl's wrist. Her father's habit, 3 fingers over the pulse, always the first thing. And then her nose had found the glass on the nightstand, an inch of amber tonic left in the bottom, and what came off it was the thing her father used to teach by demonstration rather than description, because some things cannot be described, only recognized. The honest sweet of a medicine is straightforward, uncomplicated, sitting on top of whatever it has been added to. The dishonest sweet is different. It sits underneath, where it has no business being, and it clings. It is the sweet of something being hidden, and it cannot help itself, and once you have smelled it, you do not mistake it for anything else. Her father had first pointed it out to her when she was 11 years old, standing beside him in the shop, with her sleeves rolled up, and her hands already knowing the difference between a mortar's handle and a pestil's. "Nola," he had said, holding the bottle to the lamp, "when the sweet has nothing to explain itself, be suspicious. A compound earns its smell. This one hasn't." She had never forgotten it. She remembered everything her father showed her, which was the great gift of her education, and, as of this evening, its most immediate complication. "There now," said Dr. Null, turning from the window with the expression that certain doctors produce the way other people produce smiles, without thought, for anyone who needs it. "Grief takes people in strange ways, my dear. You have had a very hard season." He said it to the room, not to her. A man who addresses the room instead of the person he is answering is a man who wants witnesses to his reasonableness. "This young woman," he continued, spreading his hands gently, "buried her father not 2 months past. An apothecary, a decent man in his way, though I understand there were some questions about his accounts. She has now been brought before another sick room, and the mind under such strain will reach for a villain before it accepts a simpler truth. Coates, take her arm, gently." Coates moved. Nola did not give him her arm. She was looking at the glass. "Test the tonic," she said. "Hold a drop of it over a coal and tell me it smells of nothing but medicine." "I will do nothing of the kind," said Dr. Null, not warmly now. "Then I will," said the Earl. He had not been expected to speak. By Mrs. Brant's accounting, he had not spoken in 3 days. He had been arranged against his pillows like a portrait of himself, thin, grey-complected, eyes half-closed against the November light. But his head had turned on the bolster, and those eyes, grey, still, with something sharp under the exhaustion, had come to rest on Nola with the specific attention of a man who has been lying in one room for 4 months, with very little to occupy him but observation. "You," he said, "you're the apothecary's daughter." Yes, my lord. A pause that cost him. She could see it cost him. They sent you to sit with me. Yes, my lord. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. More like the shadow of one, discovered in a coat he had not worn in some time. And you have decided you'd rather not? I would rather you didn't need sitting with. Brant, he said, without raising his voice, because he had no voice to raise, put the woman somewhere I can find her, and tonight, send her up. That was how Nola Vick came to be locked in a second-floor guest room with a cold supper, and the word hysterical set outside her door like a placard. She heard it through the wood as they turned the key. Mrs. Brant, who was not a cruel woman, had said it in the tone of a diagnosis. Hysterical, poor creature, father just gone, and now this, and Nola sat on the edge of the bed and let it settle over her along with every other word that had attached itself to her this season. Unfortunate, irregular, unsuitable. She had learned not to argue with words. Words could only be outrun by facts, and facts required time. She thought about the glass. She thought about the sweet that sat wrong beneath the bitter. She thought about her father's stock receipt, the one she had read over his shoulder at 13. Do not confuse. Compound returned in error. No honest use for this in a proper preparation. She thought about what that compound smelled like over heat. And she thought about what she had smelled over the Earl's glass. And the thinking arrived at the same place every time she did it. Mrs. Brant came for her 2 hours later, carrying no candle and making no noise. She stood in the doorway and looked at Nola the way the household had been looking at her since she arrived, measuring, withholding, not yet certain what to do with what they found. You will come quietly, Mrs. Brant said. You will say nothing on the stairs. I don't believe you. A pause. I am bringing you because he asks it with his own voice, and in 22 years I have not refused that man a thing asked that way. That is all this is. My knowledge, said Nola, is the least threatening thing in this house right now. Everything else I have noticed is worse. She went. The Earl was sitting higher on the bolsters. He had the particular look of a man who has been genuinely curious about something for the first time in months, and who finds this more exhausting than he expected. Sit, he said, where I can see your face, and tell me what you smelled. Tell me plainly, because I find patience is a thing I have been running low on since approximately September, and I have used the last of what I had left on your predecessor, who told me I was dying with enormous warmth and no useful information whatsoever. So Nola told him plainly. She told him about the wrong kind of sweet and what her father had called it. She told him that certain compounds cannot be fully masked, that heat brings them up regardless of what else has been added, the way a bad plank in a floor makes itself known under any amount of finish. She told him about the test her father had used, a drop of the suspect liquid on a hot coal, and how the smoke would tell you more than the taste ever could. He called it honest chemistry, she said, his phrase for the way a substance cannot help being what it is, no matter what else it has been mixed with. The Earl was quiet for a moment. The house moved around them, a clock below, the distant sound of a door. How long, he said at last, have I been declining? 4 months, Mrs. Brant told me. And the doctor has attended me for the same 4 months since the first episode. He turned his head and looked at the glass on the nightstand. When he looked back, she could see the weight of what he was deciding. Not whether to believe her, but whether a man could bear to believe what believing required of him. I am not asking you to decide anything tonight, Nola said. I am asking you to let me take that glass downstairs before morning. The Earl looked at her for another moment. His voice, when it came, was dry enough to strike sparks. You are the least likely candidate for trust in this county, Miss Vick. Your father's accounts were a subject of some interest. My father's accounts were irregular, said Nola, because he sometimes forgot to charge people who couldn't pay. It made his books look strange. It made him very poor. It is the only irregular thing he ever did, and I would stake everything I own on it, which is currently a borrowed cloak and a month's wage, so weigh that accordingly. The Earl's mouth did the thing again. This time it completed itself into something recognizable. Take the glass, he said. Tomorrow you taste everything before I touch it. Everything. I don't care what it looks like. He closed his eyes. "Brant will hate it." "She will come around," said Nola. She was more right than she knew. Mrs. Brant came around at 5 in the morning, standing over the kitchen hearth with her arms folded and her jaw set to disbelieve, watching Nola hold a drop of the amber tonic over a coal on the grate. The smoke came up thin and sweet and wrong. It smelled like nothing that belonged in a medicine. It smelled like something that had been added to a medicine, because the medicine's taste was too strong to notice anything underneath it. Mrs. Brant stood very still. "Again," she said. Nola did it again. The same smoke, the same smell. It sat in the cold kitchen like an uninvited guest who has no intention of leaving. "That," Mrs. Brant said, in a voice stripped of everything except its meaning, "is not an ingredient." "No," said Nola, "it isn't." There was a long silence. "I have poured that man's medicine for 22 years, the housekeeper said. "I never once tested it. It never occurred to me." Her jaw worked once tightly. "I am going to need you to show me everything you do in this sick room, every step, every reason. And if you deceive me once in any degree, I will be the first one to go to the magistrate. Are we clear?" They were clear. Rufus Hartfield arrived 10 days later on a bright afternoon with 2 horses and more noise than the house had heard in months. He was the Earl's cousin, younger by several years, handsome in the way that requires no maintenance, and he came up the stairs already opening his arms, already wet-eyed, already saying his cousin's name with the full weight of fear and relief and love that a man performs when he has practiced it on the journey over. The Earl received him quietly, held him, said, "Hush, Rufus, I am still making myself inconvenient." And Rufus laughed, warm, full, entirely convincing, and Nola, standing by the window, watched his eyes open over the Earl's shoulder and find her across the room, and rest on her for one flat, measuring second before the laughter folded back over them. One look, gone before she could point to it. She did not tell herself she had imagined it. He was kind to her. That was the problem. He thanked her publicly and specifically for her care of his cousin. He expressed admiration for her courage and her knowledge. He was warm in the way that makes coldness seem like the character flaw, and a month into his visit, he found her alone in the upper corridor. In the early evening, leaned against the wall beside her in the easy posture of a man sharing a confidence, and said he felt he owed her a warning, because no one else would have the heart to give it. People in the county, he said with genuine seeming reluctance, were talking about her father's business, the irregular accounts, the unusual purchases. A certain reputation, he said, sighing, for preparations that did not appear in any standard text. And wasn't it striking, he said, not critically, he was careful to say not critically, that such a reputation now surrounded the one woman with sole and unrestricted access to his cousin's food and drink. "That is very considerate of you," said Nola, in the voice she used for unidentified substances and difficult customers both, "to warn me against a rumour by carrying it up here yourself." She held his eyes when she said it. And for one moment, one unguarded, unmistakable moment, the warmth dropped off his face entirely. She saw what was beneath it. Then the warmth came back, and he laughed and called her forthright, and said it was a quality he admired. He went down the stairs whistling, and Nola stood in the corridor and understood 2 things simultaneously: that the warmest man in the house had, twice in the span of 10 seconds, taken her length for a box, and that she had very nearly let him talk her out of her own eyesight. She went to her room that night and found the small tin in her medical case, the one with her father's handwriting on the label. The compound noted returned, "No honest use, keep separate," was gone. She sat on her bed and did not go to the Earl. She thought about what she had: a smell over a coal, a man who was mending steadily under her care, a cousin with a cold look behind his warm face, and a missing tin that no one could verify had ever existed except by her own account. Against that, an irregular receipt book, a dead father with a complicated reputation, her own 2 hands which everyone in the county now knew had been the only hands near the Earl's food for weeks. She needed the tin found in the hand that had taken it, not simply absent from hers. So she said nothing, and watched, and tasted everything before the Earl touched it, and told herself it was patience and not fear, and did not entirely convince herself. The gathering Rufus arranged for the new year was warm and well-attended and entirely deliberate. 2 county magistrates, several neighbours, Dr. Noll, invited back because excluding the family physician would look strange, and strange appearances were, Rufus said with great feeling, the last thing any of them needed. The Earl told Nola the night before that he understood what dinner it was. "He is an economical man," the Earl said, sitting up by the fire in the first coat he had worn in months, the colour returning to his face by degrees. "He does not like loose ends." "Then we need to be ready," said Nola. They were not ready for Dr. Noll's hand at the punch bowl. She saw it, barely, across a crowded room, a fold of the wrist, a twist of paper. And she looked at the Earl, and the Earl looked back, and they understood in the same instant that the game they had been playing had been declared forfeit by people who had been playing longer. He was taken with cramps an hour later, in front of the assembled company, doubled over the card table, his hands drawn up, his face the colour of old paper. Dr. Noll rose from his side, sorrowful and certain, and turned to the room and built his case stone by stone in a voice of profound compassion. 6 weeks of meals managed by one woman, 2 relapses, each one falling when his patient had been in unusual company or unusual circumstances, a tin found beneath a travelling case with a dead man's writing on the label and a good portion of its contents spent, and a maid, young Bess Crane, who had come to him, he said on her own, in tears, who had seen Miss Vick at the punch bowl that evening with a paper twist in her hand. He turned slowly, and the room turned with him, and they all arrived at Nola Vick, standing pale beside the fireplace with her hands at her sides. "Search her rooms," Dr. Noll said gently. "For his lordship's sake, I pray we find nothing." Rufus guided them there himself, reluctantly, his face a study in the particular devastation of a man who loves well and is forced by love to do a terrible thing. They found the tin under her travelling case, her father's handwriting on the label, a third of the contents gone. "I found it," Nola said, and heard her own voice come out too thin, too urgent, the exact sound of a woman who is aware she is losing ground. "I gathered it as evidence. It was taken from my case a fortnight ago. I kept silent because I had no proof of who had taken it, and accusing without proof." "Accusing without proof," said Rufus softly, "is precisely what you did 4 months ago, and we all extended you a great deal of grace for it." He shook his head. "I do not want to believe this. I do not want to believe any of this." The room made the sound of a verdict. They carried the Earl up to bed and kept Nola below, and what happened then was the worst thing of the whole season. Not the tin, not the room, not Rufus's impeccable grief. What happened was that the Earl looked at her across the drawing-room, his face grey and cramped and the tin in his hands, and she watched him, for the length of one breath, no more. She counted it. She would count it for a long time, doubt her. She saw it land. "Ask me nothing tonight," she said, the apothecary's voice, flat and even, which was not how she felt, but her father had given it to her, and she was grateful for it now. "You are not fit to weigh anything clearly, and I cannot bear to be weighed wrong. Lock me up. It is where this was always pointing." She looked at him steadily. "But when you are clear, and you will be because it is the one thing in you that cannot be dosed, do the arithmetic. Count when each episode fell, and where the doctor was. Count the weeks you had no cramps at all, and whose hands were near your food those weeks. Count what a woman gains by harming a man who has trusted her with more than she has been trusted with in her entire life." She paused. "That is all I have left to give you. Do the sums." They locked her in a cold storeroom off the cellar stairs. She sat on the stone floor and used up the fear methodically, all the way to the bottom of it, until she could think again. Mrs. Brant came on the 4th night with a covered basket and a candle. She lowered herself onto the stone floor beside Nola without ceremony. She was 53 years old, and her knees said so, and she sat down anyway. "I sealed what I could," she said, and opened the basket. 3 items. A stopped bottle of the punch, drawn off before it was carried to the drawing-room. The tonic glass from Dr. Noll's last visit, unwashed, with his fingerprint still on it. A folded paper in the housekeeper's handwriting, dates, times, which meals had been prepared by whose hands, going back 7 weeks, witnessed and signed. I will swear to every item before the magistrate and before God afterward." She looked at Nola. "There is to be a hearing. Mr. Rufus has arranged for it to be quiet and resolved before the morning is out. The constable, 2 witnesses, done." She paused. "You have 3 days." "I need one more thing," said Nola. "The name of the chemist in town where Dr. Null purchases his supplies." "Hendricks, High Street." Mrs. Brant was quiet for a moment. "His lordship's solicitor, Mr. Doode, is a man who has never in his professional life failed to follow a paper trail when given direction to do so." She stopped. "If his lordship were counting," said Nola. "Yes," said Mrs. Brant, "if." 3 floors up, Gavin Hartfield was counting. He lay in the dark and he counted the way he had counted everything since boyhood, without sentiment, without letting the preferred answer interfere with the actual one. He counted the episodes. November the 4th, first cramps, same day, Dr. Null had doubled the dose and administered it himself. December the 4th, second cramps, same day the doctor had visited. January 1st, the dinner, the punch bowl, the room full of witnesses. Against those, 6 weeks in between, meals drawn and tasted by Nola Vick alone, the doctor barred beyond the corridor. And no cramps, not one. 6 weeks of mending, slow and honest and uninterrupted, colour returning, sleep returning, appetite returning. The poison fell where the doctor was. It had never fallen in a week that belonged entirely to her. That was not an impression, that was a column of dates, and it added only one way. He counted the tin. A container with a woman's father's handwriting on it, found beneath a case she was never known to sleep in. She slept in the chair beside his bed, and every servant in the house could attest to it. A woman who intends harm does not label her own instrument in a dead father's hand and leave it to be found by the first search. She keeps it nowhere or nowhere traceable. A thing left to be found is different from a thing concealed. He had been managing an estate long enough to know the difference between a planted document and a hidden one. He counted last what she had given him in the drawing room. Not a plea, not a defence, a set of instructions. Do the arithmetic. Count. He had done it. It came out the same every time. He sent a note to Mr. Doode. 3 words. Purchase records, Hendricks. Then he lay back and waited, and was ashamed in the cold and specific way of a man who takes precision seriously, and had for 30 seconds in a drawing room with poison still in his stomach, been imprecise. The hearing Rufus had arranged was set for the great hall, mid-morning, before what Rufus had intended to be a small and manageable audience. The audience that assembled was neither small nor especially manageable, because the staff of Dunmore Hall had made a collective and entirely wordless decision about which side of the room they intended to occupy. Nola was brought in by 2 footmen who walked, she noted, with rather more distance from her arms than the situation required. Rufus stood by the fire in dark morning dress, a portrait of controlled grief. Dr. Null stood at his shoulder. At the far end of the hall, Magistrate Frederick Aldgate sat in a hard chair with the patience of a man who has learned the truth surfaces faster when you let it alone. "This is a grievous business," Rufus began. "Then let's not make it more grievous by conducting it in a corner," said Nola, and every head turned. Her voice had carried better than she intended. She was grateful for it. "If there is a charge, make it in full, not at the door, not with everyone's back half-turned, so it can be told differently next week. Call it here, where it can be answered here." Magistrate Aldgate looked up from his chair. His eyes were the colour of cold slate. "She asks to be heard openly," he said. "The law costs nothing by being conducted in a room with proper light. Speak your charge, Dr. Null." So Dr. Null spoke it. He was thorough. She would give him that for the rest of her life. He was thorough and smooth and genuinely persuasive, and he built his case like a man who had been preparing it for some time. 6 weeks of exclusive access. 2 relapses, each conveniently observed. A tin with a dead man's handwriting on it, the irregular reputation of a country apothecary. And a maid, Bess Crane, standing white at the edge of the crowd, who had seen something, the doctor said, at the punch bowl. "Bess," said Nola, not in the apothecary's voice now, but in the lower register that she used with people in pain. "Look at me, not at him. You are about to say something that will be very hard to take back. I am not going to stop you." A pause. "But I am asking you to wait and to hear what I have to show this room first, and if you can say it after, say it, and I will go with the constable and not speak another word. I give you my promise." She turned to Magistrate Aldgate. "There are sealed and dated samples in this house," she said, "held by Mrs. Brant, documented in her hand, untouched since she sealed them. I am asking that they be tested here in front of everyone before anything else is decided." Mrs. Brant came forward before anyone could object. She set her basket on the entrance hall table with the deliberate care of a woman who has been preparing for exactly this moment. She uncovered the items one by one, reading the date and provenance from her notes in a clear, unhurried voice. She held the first stopped bottle to the light, uncorked it, and held a drop of the contents over the coal in the hall brazier. The smoke came up thin and sweet and wrong. It filled the hall. The same smell Nola had named over the kitchen fire weeks ago, the same sweet that sat under a bitterness that had no business being there. It hung in the cold air of Dunmore Hall's entrance, and it did not dissipate quickly. Dr. Noel's face went very still. Magistrate Aldgate rose from his chair, walked to the brazier and bent over it, breathed in, stood back up. "That," he said, in the tone of a man selecting his words with unusual care, "is not a medicine." Mrs. Brant tested the second bottle. The same result, the same smoke, the same smell. Into the silence that followed, a voice from the staircase said, "No, it is not." Everyone looked up. Gavin Hartfield, Earl of Dunmore, stood at the top of the stairs in a dark coat that fit him loosely now and would not always, leaning on the banister, with the economy of a man who has saved his effort for what actually matters. He came down one step at a time. Nobody spoke while he did it. When he reached the bottom and turned toward the hall, he looked considerably more present than anyone had seen him in 4 months. Behind him came Mr. Dode, who was indeed a dry and thorough man, and who opened a leather portfolio against the hall table and read, in a voice like a drawer sliding shut, the records of Dr. Prescott Knowles' purchases from Hendricks the chemist over the preceding 18 months, including 3 purchases of a compound in quantities that no honest medical practice could explain. The most recent had been made 11 days before the tin had appeared beneath Nola's travelling case. He also read, with the same economy, the extent of Rufus Hartfield's debts. They were considerable, secured entirely against the Dunmore estate. An estate worth nothing to him while his cousin breathed, and worth all of it the hour his cousin stopped. Bess Crane put her apron to her face. When she spoke, it came in pieces. She had seen nothing at the punch bowl. She was sorry. Mr. Rufus had given her money and told her she would lose her place, and worse, and her family with her, if she did not say what he had written out for her to say. He had brought her the tin himself, wrapped in his own handkerchief, and stood over her while she placed it under the case and told her to say nothing, and it would go easily for her. She was sorry. She would say the truth of it before any court in England. She was only a frightened girl, and she was sorry. Rufus said something. His voice was still warm, and it was the wrong temperature for the room. Magistrate Aldgate looked at him for a long moment, then at Dr. Noel. Then he said, to no one in particular, "I believe I have a great deal of paperwork ahead of me this afternoon." The Earl crossed the hall. He stopped in front of Nola. They were, she noticed for the first time, nearly the same height. She had not noticed it before, because she had spent 4 months, sitting or kneeling, or standing 3 steps away while he was horizontal. He looked at her in the way he had been looking at her for 4 months from a pillow, grey-eyed, dry, precisely observant. "I doubted you," he said, in front of everyone, without apology, because apology was not the honest shape of what he was doing. For the length of one breath, on the worst night of either of us, I let the scale tip. I have been doing arithmetic ever since. It arrives at the same place every time I do it. "I know," said Nola. "I told you it would." "You did." A pause. "I have already attended to a matter with Doade that I intend to explain to you in full when there are fewer people in this room. But I will tell you the relevant part now." He looked at her steadily. "I want you to stay, not on any terms that belong to a ledger. I want you to stay because you are the only person who has told me the truth at cost to herself, because I cannot make the arithmetic come out any other way, and because I have discovered, against my nature and somewhat against my will, that the prospect of any morning without an argument with you before breakfast is a prospect I find genuinely unappealing." "That is," said Nola, "a very long route to a simple question." "I am aware," said the Earl. "I have been somewhat bedridden. My efficiency has suffered, yes or no?" The corner of Nola's mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. It was the expression of a woman who has been called irregular and hysterical and unfortunate, and has come through the far side of all of it with her apothecary's face intact, and is now, for the first time in some months, setting it carefully aside. "Yes," she said, plainly, because there is only one honest way to answer a plain question. Dr. Noll was taken before the afternoon was out. Rufus was given a knight and a fast horse and a sum of money that contained nothing of affection, and the understanding that if he was ever again seen in England, every document in Mr. Dode's portfolio would go to the Crown by first post. He took the horse before dawn. The county closed over the space where he had been the way it closes over everything, quickly, without ceremony, and with a certain relief. Bess Crane kept her position. The Earl said a girl who untells a lie in front of a full room, when every person in it expected her to hold to it, has demonstrated more character than most of the men who had shown up that morning, with their backs straight and their consciences uncomplicated. Nola agreed, and meant it more emphatically. Mrs. Brant kept her keys and her 22 years, and her opinion of Nola, which she communicated not in words but in the particular way she always had the good tea ready when Nola came downstairs, and the way she pressed her thumb ring into the wax on every letter Nola sent afterward, as if each seal were a small and private endorsement. The Earl recovered steadily through the winter and into the spring. An honest recovery, with no cramps, no relapses, no amber glasses on nightstands. He argued with Nola about the management of the home farm and the drainage of the kitchen garden, and whether the correct response to a fraudulent supplier was a letter or a visit. She won that one, because she won every argument that touched on chemistry and compounds, and he conceded those arguments in the gracious manner of a man who has decided that being right is less important than knowing who to ask. In the second spring, after the winter that had nearly finished him, they walked the Dunmore grounds on a mild afternoon, the fields running to green and the kitchen garden coming in, and the Earl said, in the thoughtful voice he used, for things he had been turning over for some time, that it was a peculiar thing to have been saved by a woman who knew what coal smoke was supposed to smell like. "You saved yourself," said Nola. "You stopped taking the medicine before I ever arrived. You told me so." "I stopped because it tasted wrong. I didn't know what it meant." "You knew enough to act on it. That's what matters." He looked at her sideways, the look she had come to know well, grey-eyed and dry, and no longer tired. "I have been thinking," he said, which was how he always began the things that mattered most, as if he wanted it on record that he had not spoken carelessly, that the county will have a great deal to say for the next several decades about a woman who arrived as a sick-room attendant and left as a countess. "They'll say it regardless," said Nola. "Better they get the facts straight while they're at it." "Yes," said the Earl. "I had a feeling you would see it that way." He offered her his arm. She took it because the path was uneven, and they were walking toward the kitchen garden, and there was still a great deal to be done. And she had always been the kind of woman who took the practical thing first and let everything else arrange itself behind it in good order. The afternoon settled around them, easy and unhurried, the way good days do when no one is rushing to get to the end of them. The apothecary's daughter and the Earl of Dunmore walked the length of their own grounds in the long gold light, and were, in the plainest possible sense, exactly where they were supposed to be.